The Keldrathi warship materialized in Earth's orbit without warning, its massive hull torn open like a gutted fish. Emergency broadcasts screamed across every frequency as governments scrambled to respond. But before a single missile could launch, the alien vessel simply died. Its engines went dark, its shields flickered out, and it began a slow, inevitable descent toward the Nevada desert. Crashed with enough force to register as a magnitude 4.2 earthquake, carving a trench 3 miles long through the ancient lake bed. When the dust settled, humanity stared at the wreckage of a ship that shouldn't exist, built by a species that shouldn't know we were here. Colonel Marcus Hayes stood at the edge of the impact crater 36 hours later, his weathered face illuminated by the harsh Nevada sun. At 52, he'd seen enough classified projects to know when something would change everything. The ship stretched before him like a metallic cathedral, its architecture so alien it hurt to look at. Broken spires twisted toward the sky, hull plating glowed with residual heat, and strange symbols pulsed weakly along what remained of its superstructure. Teams in hazmat suits crawled over the wreckage like ants on a carcass, but Hayes knew they were thinking too small. Everyone saw a crashed alien ship. He saw an opportunity. Dr. Karen Liu arrived on site that evening, her credentials in xenotechnology making her the obvious choice to lead the scientific team. She was 41, brilliant, and had spent 15 years preparing for first contact. Just not like this. She'd imagined peaceful communication, cultural exchange, perhaps a trade agreement for technology. Instead, she got a corpse of a ship and 3 dead aliens in the command chamber, their bodies already decomposing in Earth's atmosphere. The Keldrathi were tall, bipedal, with chitinous plates covering most of their bodies and multiple eyes arranged in a semicircle across their faces. They died from something internal, their organs liquefied by what looked like a fail-safe system built into their own biology. The ship itself was a marvel and a disaster. Its power core was shattered, its weapons systems fried beyond recognition, and its navigation array looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. But Karen found something else, something the initial surveys had missed. Deep in what she assumed was the engineering section, protected by layers of armor that had somehow survived the crash, she discovered a databank. It was still active, powered by some kind of backup system that humanity didn't understand. When her team finally cracked its encryption 3 weeks later, they found something that made Karen's blood run cold. This wasn't just a warship. It was a scout vessel. And the Keldrathi weren't exploring. They were cataloging. The files painted a picture that Pentagon analysts would spend months trying to comprehend. The Keldrathi Empire controlled 47 star systems, commanded a fleet of over 6,000 warships, and had been expanding for 3 centuries. They were conquerors, pure and simple, and their method was ruthlessly efficient. Find a primitive world, catalog its resources and population, then return with overwhelming force. Resistance was met with orbital bombardment. Compliance meant slavery. According to the database, Earth had been marked for harvest in approximately 18 standard cycles. That translated to roughly 3 Earth years. Marcus stood in the Pentagon briefing room 8 weeks after the crash, facing a room full of Joint Chiefs and intelligence directors who looked like they'd aged a decade overnight. The president herself sat at the head of the table, her expression carved from stone. Marcus had prepared his presentation carefully, knowing he had one chance to sell the most audacious plan in human history. He clicked through images of the alien ship, its systems, its capabilities. Then he dropped the hammer. The Keldrathi had made a mistake. They'd sent a scout ship with full military specifications, complete technical readouts of their fleet composition, and detailed information about their weapons systems. They'd handed humanity a blueprint for their own destruction. General Patricia Wolfe, chair of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward with steel in her eyes. She was 63, a veteran of 3 wars, and had the kind of presence that made colonels nervous. She asked the question everyone was thinking but afraid to voice. Could they rebuild it? Could they take this broken alien wreck and turn it into something that could fight back? Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd been waiting for that exact question. They couldn't rebuild it. They could do better. They could reverse engineer every system, strip out the alien technology, and build something new, something human, something that the Keldrathi would never see coming. The project received a code name within hours of approval: Project Defiance. Its budget was classified, its existence known to fewer than 300 people worldwide, and its timeline was impossible. They had 3 years to build a warship capable of facing an empire that had been perfecting space warfare for centuries. Karen assembled a team that read like a who's who of human genius. Aerospace engineers from NASA, weapons designers from DARPA, materials scientists from MIT and Caltech, propulsion experts from SpaceX and Blue Origin. They worked in shifts around the clock in a facility carved into the mountains of Colorado, so far underground that even satellites couldn't detect their activities. The first challenge was propulsion. The Keldrathi drive system used principles that human physics couldn't explain. It bent space in ways that violated known laws, created bubbles of altered reality that allowed faster-than-light travel. Karen's team spent 6 months just trying to understand the mathematics before Jack Morrison, a 34-year-old propulsion engineer with 3 doctorates and a reputation for impossible solutions, suggested they stop trying to understand it. They didn't need to know why it worked. They just needed to know how to make it work. It was the kind of practical thinking that separated theoretical physicists from engineers, and it changed everything. They built the drive chamber first, using materials synthesized from the alien hull plating. The Keldrathi used something humanity didn't have: an alloy that combined metallic properties with crystalline structures at the molecular level. It was stronger than titanium, lighter than aluminum, and somehow managed to channel exotic energies without degrading. Rachel Ford, the materials scientist leading that particular nightmare, spent 4 months failing to replicate it before she realized they were approaching the problem backwards. They didn't need to copy it exactly. They needed to find Earth materials that could approximate its properties. She created a composite using carbon nanotubes, rare Earth elements, and a polymer matrix that, while not identical to the alien material, came close enough for their purposes. The weapons systems proved even more challenging. The Keldrathi used directed energy weapons that made human lasers look like flashlights. Their plasma cannons could punch through 3 meters of reinforced steel from 10,000 kilometers away. Their missile systems employed guidance AI that could predict and counter evasive maneuvers before they happened. Lieutenant Commander Gregory Price, a weapons officer with 15 years in the Navy and a gift for destructive innovation, took one look at the specifications and laughed. Then he went to work. If they couldn't match the alien technology directly, they'd use human ingenuity to create something unexpected. He designed weapons systems that combined alien energy principles with human innovation, creating hybrid systems that were crude by Keldrathi standards but terrifyingly effective. The hull design became a point of heated debate. The Keldrathi built their ships like fortresses, with heavy armor and redundant systems. They could take tremendous punishment and keep fighting. But they were also massive, slow to maneuver, and relied on shields that required enormous power. Marcus argued for a different approach, one that drew on humanity's history of asymmetric warfare. Make the ship smaller, faster, harder to hit. Trade raw defensive power for agility and speed. Use the enemy's own tactics against them. The Keldrathi expected to face primitive weapons and panicked defenders. Give them something that could dance between their firing solutions and strike from unexpected angles. Commander Lisa Chen, the ship's designated captain, was 39 years old and had commanded 3 different vessels in her naval career. She'd been pulled from her position as executive officer on an aircraft carrier specifically for this project, and she approached it with the kind of methodical intensity that made her both respected and feared. She spent hours in the design meetings, pushing back against engineers who forgot that someone would actually have to crew this vessel. She demanded redundant life support, insisted on manual overrides for critical systems, and fought for a command structure that borrowed from submarine warfare rather than surface vessels. In space, she argued, you fought like a submarine. Silent, deadly, and willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The ship took shape over 18 months of brutal, exhausting work. It was smaller than the Keldrathi scout ship, roughly the size of a modern destroyer, but it packed weapons systems that would make a battleship jealous. Its hull used the composite Rachel had developed, layered in geometric patterns that deflected energy weapons more effectively than solid armor. Its engines could accelerate at rates that would turn unprotected crew into paste, which meant they had to develop inertial dampening systems from scratch using principles they'd pulled from the alien databanks. The ship was beautiful in a brutal, efficient way. All hard angles and predatory lines, painted in non-reflective black with active camouflage systems that could make it virtually invisible in the void of space. They named it Retribution. Karen thought the name was too aggressive, too provocative for what should be a defensive vessel. Marcus disagreed. The Keldrathi were coming to destroy or enslave humanity. They deserved to know that Earth wasn't going down without a fight. The president approved the name with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd read the intelligence reports. She knew what was coming. If this ship failed, if Project Defiance couldn't deliver on its promise, Earth would burn. Cities would be reduced to ash, populations herded into processing centers, and human civilization would become a footnote in Keldrathi expansion reports. The name Retribution felt appropriate. The crew selection process was brutal. Lisa needed 120 people to run the ship effectively, and they had to be the absolute best humanity could offer. Fighter pilots, submarine officers, radar operators, weapons specialists, engineers who could repair alien technology with duct tape and determination. They pulled from every military branch, every allied nation, creating a crew that represented the best of human capability. They trained for 8 months in simulators, running scenarios that ranged from unlikely to impossible. They learned to fight a ship that shouldn't exist against an enemy that had been perfecting space warfare for generations. The first test flight nearly killed everyone aboard. The engines worked perfectly, accelerating Retribution to 0.3 light speed in under 6 minutes. But the inertial dampeners lagged by 0.03 seconds, just enough to cause severe nausea and minor injuries across the crew. Jack Morrison spent 3 days redesigning the system from scratch, eventually creating a version that anticipated acceleration commands and activated fractionally before the engines engaged. It was the kind of innovation born from desperation, and it worked. The second test flight went smoothly. The third pushed the ship to 0.7 light speed. By the 6th test, they were confident enough to attempt a short range faster than light jump. The jump drive activated at 300 hours on a Tuesday morning, with observers from every major space agency watching from Earth. For 3 seconds, Retribution ceased to exist in normal space. It folded reality around itself, created a bubble that existed outside conventional physics, and traveled 20 million kilometers in an instant. It reappeared exactly on target, systems functioning normally, crew shaken but unharmed. Karen watched the telemetry data stream in and felt tears running down her face. They'd done it. Humanity had built a faster-than-light starship from stolen alien technology and human desperation. Now they just had to hope it was enough. The Keldrathi arrived 3 months ahead of schedule. Their fleet materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system, 42 warships arranged in a formation that screamed overwhelming force. They'd done this thousands of times before, reducing countless civilizations to ash and slavery. Earth would be no different. They sent a message on all frequencies, translated into hundreds of languages by their linguistic AI. Surrender immediately, and some would be allowed to live as laborers. Resist and face extinction. They expected panic, desperate pleas, perhaps a few futile missile launches from primitive governments. They got silence. Admiral Vectel commanded the Keldrathi fleet from his flagship, a behemoth that dwarfed everything else in the formation. He'd led 17 conquest operations, claimed 9 systems for the Empire, and never encountered serious resistance. Primitive species all followed the same pattern: initial defiance, futile resistance, eventual collapse, and final submission. He expected Earth to fall within a standard day. The fact that they hadn't responded to his ultimatum was merely proof of their shock and terror. He ordered the fleet to advance toward Earth, planning to establish orbit before beginning selective bombardment. That's when Retribution appeared on his sensors. The human ship materialized 3,000 kilometers off the Keldrathi flagship's port flank, having jumped directly into weapons range. Every sensor in the alien fleet screamed alerts as targeting systems struggled to acquire the new contact. It was small, impossibly small compared to their massive warships, but its energy signature was completely wrong. The readings suggested advanced Keldrathi technology, but the configuration was alien. Vectel stared at the tactical display with growing confusion. How did a primitive species build something that registered as a threat? He opened a communication channel, demanding identification. Lisa Chen's response was simple and delivered in perfect Keldrathi, translated using the linguistic database from the crashed scout ship. "This is the human starship Retribution. Leave our system or be destroyed." Vectel laughed, a sound like grinding metal that his crew found reassuring. One ship against 42 was suicide, not strategy. He ordered 3 destroyers to eliminate the human vessel while the rest of the fleet proceeded toward Earth. Standard doctrine called for overwhelming response to any resistance. The 3 Keldrathi ships peeled away from the formation, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They expected to obliterate the primitive ship within minutes. They were still expecting it when Retribution opened fire. The human hybrid weapons system, combining alien plasma technology with human-designed targeting AI and missile guidance systems, caught the Keldrathi completely off guard. 6 plasma bolts struck the lead destroyer before its shields could fully form, punching through armor and vaporizing critical systems. It died in seconds, reactor containment failing and creating a brief new sun. The other 2 destroyers scattered, trying to bracket the human ship and bring their superior numbers to bear. But Retribution moved like nothing they'd ever seen, its engines pushing accelerations that should have pulped any organic crew. It twisted between incoming fire with contemptuous ease, its active camouflage making precise targeting impossible. Then it activated the human-designed weapon that Gregory Price had spent a year perfecting. The railgun, a kinetic weapon that accelerated magnetic projectiles to .9 light speed, punched through the second destroyer's shields like they weren't there. The third destroyer attempted to flee, jumping to faster than light speeds in a desperate escape. It never made it. Retribution's jump drive activated first, positioning the human ship directly in the Keldrathi vessel's path. The resulting collision destroyed the alien ship instantly. Vectel watched 3 of his destroyers die in under 4 minutes and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: fear. This wasn't how primitive species fought. They were supposed to be disorganized, desperate, easy to crush. The human ship moved with precision that suggested hundreds of years of space combat experience. Its weapons combined familiar Keldrathi technology with innovations that shouldn't exist. Worse, its tactics showed an understanding of Keldrathi doctrine that should have been impossible. He didn't know about the crashed scout ship, about the database humanity had cracked, about the years spent studying Keldrathi warfare. He just knew that his comfortable assumptions had died with those 3 destroyers. The Admiral ordered the entire fleet to engage, abandoning his planned bombardment of Earth to deal with this unexpected threat. 39 warships turned as one, weapons charging, shields overlapping in a defensive formation that had served the Empire for centuries. Retribution responded by vanishing, its jump drive taking it 15,000 kilometers away in an instant. Then it struck, hitting the fleet's rear guard with everything it had. 2 cruisers and a battleship died before they could react, their shields overwhelmed by concentrated fire from weapons that hit harder than anything their size should carry. The human ship jumped again before return fire could arrive, repositioning for another strike. Lisa commanded Retribution with cold precision, her submarine warfare background serving her perfectly. She treated the battle like a game of 3-dimensional chess played at relativistic speeds. Strike from unexpected angles, Never stay in one place. Use superior speed and maneuverability to offset the enemy's numerical advantage. Her crew performed flawlessly, executing complex maneuvers that pushed their training to its limits. Gregory managed the weapon systems with savage efficiency, rationing their limited ammunition and making every shot count. Jack kept the engines running at capacities that exceeded design specifications, pushing human engineering to its breaking point. Karen monitored the alien ships, analyzing their patterns and finding weaknesses in tactics that had conquered dozens of worlds. The battle raged for 6 hours, a brutal dance of death that stretched across millions of kilometers. Retribution couldn't win by conventional means. The Keldrathi had too many ships, too much firepower, too many redundant systems. But the human ship didn't need to win conventionally. It needed to make the cost of victory too high to stomach. Every alien ship that died was a capital investment the Empire would have to replace. Every hour they spent fighting one human vessel was time they couldn't spend conquering Earth. Lisa was fighting for time, for casualties, for the slim chance that the Keldrathi would decide Earth wasn't worth the effort. Vectel finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't a desperate last stand by a primitive species. This was asymmetric warfare conducted by beings who understood how to hurt an empire. The human ship had already destroyed 12 of his vessels, nearly a third of his fleet, and showed no signs of stopping. His crew was exhausted, his ammunition stores depleting faster than planned, and his emperor would demand answers for losses this severe. He'd conquered 9 systems with minimal casualties. This one ship had cost him more than those 9 campaigns combined. It was impossible, it was humiliating, and it was brilliant. The Admiral opened a communication channel, breaking protocol in ways that would probably cost him his command. He addressed the human ship directly, demanding to speak with their commander. Lisa appeared on his display, wearing a uniform he didn't recognize but carrying herself with authority he immediately understood. She was a warrior just like him, and she'd been winning. Vectel made an offer that would have been unthinkable 6 hours earlier. Withdraw your forces. Leave Earth alone. In return, the Keldrathi would mark this system as restricted space, too costly to conquer. Lisa's response was immediate. Humanity would never stop fighting. Every Keldrathi ship that entered this system would face resistance. There would be no easy conquest, no quick victory, just an endless bleeding of resources and ships. Vectel calculated the cost. He'd lost 12 ships already. Conquering Earth with remaining forces would mean exposing them to continuous hit-and-run attacks from this one human vessel. He'd lose more ships, maybe half his fleet. And if the humans had built one ship like this, they could build more. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, but it had also learned when to recognize a quagmire. Some conquests cost more than they were worth. He ordered the fleet to withdraw, uploading a report to the Imperial Navy that would likely end his career but save his remaining ships. Earth would be marked as a threat, potentially hostile, requiring a full battle fleet to subdue. That meant at least 200 warships, a commitment the Empire wouldn't make for decades. Lisa watched the Keldrathi fleet jump to faster-than-light speeds, leaving Earth's solar system behind. Retribution drifted alone in the void, its systems damaged, ammunition nearly exhausted, crew on the edge of collapse. They'd won. Against impossible odds, facing an enemy that had conquered the stars for centuries, humanity had fought and survived. The victory wouldn't last forever. The Keldrathi would return eventually, with more ships and better preparation. But humanity had bought time, precious time, to build more ships, to improve their technology, to prepare for the next battle. They'd proven something that the galaxy had forgotten. Humans didn't quit. They didn't surrender. And when you pushed them into a corner, they found ways to push back harder. Marcus stood in the Pentagon Command Center, watching telemetry from the battle zone. His hands were shaking, whether from relief or residual terror he couldn't say. They'd gambled everything on one ship, on human ingenuity, on the hope that centuries of warfare on Earth had taught them lessons that a conquering empire had forgotten. The gamble had paid off, but barely. He looked at the faces around him, Joint chiefs and intelligence directors who'd aged years in a single day and saw the same realization he felt. This was just the beginning. Earth had announced itself to the galaxy, not as a victim but as a threat that would have consequences, good and bad, for generations to come. Karen watched Retribution limp back toward Earth orbit and felt pride mixed with terror. They'd done the impossible, turned a crashed alien scout ship into humanity's salvation. But she understood the technology better than anyone, knew how much they'd improvised, how many systems were held together with ingenuity and prayers. They'd won because the Keldrathi underestimated them, because surprise and speed had compensated for inferior numbers. Next time the enemy would come prepared. Next time, one ship wouldn't be enough. She pulled up the preliminary designs for Retribution's sister ships, for the fleet that humanity would need to build, and got to work. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. The President addressed humanity 3 days after the battle, standing in the Oval Office with a backdrop that showed Retribution being towed into Earth orbit for repairs. She spoke of sacrifice, of human ingenuity, of the crew that had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. She didn't sugarcoat the reality. Earth had made enemies of a galactic empire. The Keldrathi would return, probably with overwhelming force. But humanity had 3 years, maybe 5 if they were lucky, to prepare. She announced the formation of Earth Defense Command, a unified military force drawing from every nation. Project Defiance was going public. The secrets were over. Every resource, every brilliant mind, every industrial capacity humanity possessed would be dedicated to building a fleet. Lisa stood on the observation deck of Retribution, staring at Earth through the reinforced windows. Her crew had performed beyond all expectations, turned 3 years of desperate preparation into a victory that shouldn't have been possible. But she knew what that victory had cost. They'd pushed the ship to its limits and beyond. Systems had failed, weapons had overheated, the hull had stress fractures that would take months to repair. They'd won by the narrowest of margins, and next time those margins wouldn't exist. She thought about the Keldrathi admiral, about the respect she'd heard in his voice when he finally withdrew. They understood each other, 2 warriors playing a game with civilizations as stakes. He'd lost this round, but there would be others. Gregory spent the days after the battle obsessively reviewing combat footage, analyzing every moment where they could have died. The Keldrathi were good, frighteningly good, and they'd been fighting in space for generations. Humanity had won through surprise, through tactics they'd never seen, through weapon systems that shouldn't exist. But surprise only worked once. He started designing new weapons, new systems, new approaches to space combat that would work even when the enemy knew what was coming. The railgun had performed beautifully, but it took too long to reload. The plasma cannons were devastating but drained too much power. He needed something better, something that could tip the balance when surprise was no longer an option. Jack couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw engine readings that should have resulted in catastrophic failure. They'd pushed Retribution beyond anything the design specs allowed, and somehow the ship had held together. Somehow the engines hadn't torn themselves apart, the jump drive hadn't folded them into another dimension, the inertial dampeners hadn't failed and liquefied the crew. He spent 16-hour days in the engine room, checking and rechecking every system, finding problems that hadn't manifested during the battle but would have within days. They'd been running on borrowed time, surviving through luck as much as skill. Next time, luck wouldn't be enough. He needed to make the ship better, stronger, more reliable. Rachel looked at the hull damage and marveled that they'd survived. Her composite material had performed beyond expectations, deflecting energy that should have vaporized the ship. But she could see its limits, places where the molecular structure had begun to degrade under sustained fire. The Keldrathi plasma weapons generated temperatures that approached stellar cores. No material could stand up to that indefinitely. She needed something better, a next-generation composite that could handle even more punishment. She had ideas, experimental alloys that combined alien principles with materials science breakthroughs. Given time, Given resources, she could create armor that would make Retribution nearly invincible. The debris field from the battle stretched across millions of kilometers, pieces of destroyed Keldrathi ships tumbling in the void. Earth sent recovery teams to salvage what they could, knowing that every piece of alien technology was another advantage for the coming war. They found weapon systems, shield generators, computer cores, communication arrays. Each one was a treasure trove of information, a window into technologies that humanity had only begun to understand. Karen coordinated the recovery effort with the kind of methodical determination that had made Project Defiance possible. They had a head start now, 3 years of research plus everything they could salvage from this battle. It still wouldn't be enough. Marcus watched construction begin on the first sister ships to Retribution. The industrial base of Earth had mobilized with a speed that surprised even him. Shipyards in orbit, asteroid mining operations, fusion reactors to power it all. Humanity was building an infrastructure for space warfare from scratch, compressing decades of development into months. It was insane, impossible, and absolutely necessary. The Keldrathi would return. Maybe in 3 years, maybe in 5, but they would return with overwhelming force. Earth needed a fleet by then, dozens of ships like Retribution, maybe hundreds. They needed orbital defenses, ground-based weapons platforms, evacuation plans for major cities. They needed to prepare for a war that would determine whether humanity survived as a species. The galaxy watched Earth's first battle with varying degrees of interest. The Keldrathi Empire had been expanding unchecked for centuries, conquering primitive species with casual efficiency. Now one of those primitive species had fought back, had destroyed a fifth of a conquest fleet with a single ship. Other species, ones that had submitted to Keldrathi rule generations ago, took notice. If humans could resist, maybe others could too. Seeds of rebellion began to germinate in a dozen slave worlds. The Empire cracked down hard, executing thousands to maintain control, but the damage was done. Earth had proven that the Keldrathi weren't invincible. That idea, once planted, was impossible to eradicate. Lisa received a promotion to Admiral, command of Earth Defense Fleet as it came into existence. She assembled a staff of officers who'd proven themselves in the battle, people who understood that space combat required new thinking. Submarine tactics, fighter pilot reflexes, missile cruiser fire control, all adapted for a 3-dimensional battlefield where distances were measured in light seconds, and battles could be over in minutes. She instituted training programs that bordered on brutal, pushing crews to their limits and beyond. Every person who served on an Earth warship needed to be the absolute best at their job. Mediocrity would get them killed and might doom their species. Diplomatic channels opened with surprising speed. Species that humanity hadn't known existed reached out through encoded messages, congratulating Earth on their victory and offering cautious support. Some shared intelligence on Keldrathi fleet movements. Others provided technical specifications that filled gaps in human understanding. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of species that hated the Empire but lacked the strength or will to fight back. Earth's resistance gave them hope, and some were willing to provide aid as long as it couldn't be traced back to them. Marcus coordinated these contacts carefully, knowing that humanity needed every advantage, but also aware that the galaxy was full of beings with their own agendas. The second ship launched 8 months after the battle. They'd named it Vengeance, continuing the theme of aggressive defiance that Marcus had championed. It was similar to Retribution, but incorporated lessons learned from the first engagement. Better armor, more efficient weapons, redundant systems that could survive catastrophic damage. Its crew trained using simulations based on actual combat data, learning from every mistake and near miss that Retribution had experienced. When Vengeance completed its trials, Lisa watched from Earth orbit and felt cautiously optimistic. 1 ship had been an anomaly. 2 ships were the beginning of a fleet. Karen stood in her laboratory, surrounded by alien technology and human innovation, and thought about the crashed Keldrathi scout ship that had started everything. The aliens had meant to catalog Earth for conquest, had come to mark humanity as another species to be enslaved. Instead, their accident had given Earth the tools to resist. She wondered sometimes about the Keldrathi crew, the three beings who died when their biology fail-safes activated. They'd inadvertently saved humanity by providing the key to their empire's technology. It was ironic in a way that would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. She turned back to her work, analyzing components from the battle debris field, looking for the next advantage humanity would need to survive. The Keldrathi Empire debated Earth for months in their Grand Council chambers. Admiral Vectel had been demoted but not executed, his honesty about the threat humanity posed earning him grudging respect. The Empire had options. They could mobilize a full battle fleet, 200 warships that could crush Earth through sheer numbers. They could declare Earth a forbidden zone, avoiding the cost of conquest. They could attempt diplomacy, though that would be unprecedented for a species they'd already marked for subjugation. In the end, they chose pride. Earth would be conquered, but carefully, methodically, with overwhelming force. The humans would be made an example of, a warning to other species that resistance only delayed the inevitable. 2 years passed in a blur of construction, training, and desperate innovation. Earth transformed itself into a fortress, bristling with orbital weapons platforms and defended by a growing fleet of warships. Retribution was no longer alone. Vengeance, defiance, resistance, rebellion, and 14 other ships stood ready, a fleet that represented humanity's best effort at survival. They weren't as advanced as Keldrathi vessels, their weapons not as refined, their crews not as experienced. But they had one advantage the Empire couldn't counter: desperation. Every human who served on those ships knew they were fighting for their species' existence. That kind of motivation made for dangerous opponents. Marcus received intelligence 3 years after the first battle that made his blood run cold. The Keldrathi were coming, a massive fleet of over 300 warships. Earth's fleet numbered 19 ships. The math was brutal, overwhelming, terrifying. But Marcus smiled anyway, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Keldrathi were bringing 300 ships because they thought that would be enough. They'd studied the first battle, analyzed human tactics, prepared for the kind of hit-and-run warfare that had cost them so dearly. They expected Earth to fight the same way, using the same strategies. They were wrong. Humanity had been preparing too, and this time the surprise would be on Earth's side. Lisa assembled her fleet commanders in a secure facility deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. These were humanity's best warriors, men and women who'd trained for years for a battle that would determine their species' fate. She showed them the intelligence, watched them absorb the numbers, saw fear and determination fight for dominance in their expressions. Then she unveiled the plan that Earth Defense Command had been developing for 2 years. They wouldn't fight in space. They'd fight at the solar system's edge, in the asteroid belt, using terrain and ambush tactics that would negate the Keldrathi numerical advantage. They'd prepared weapons caches, established supply depots, created a 3-dimensional battlefield where every rock could hide a ship or a mine or a missile platform. The Keldrathi fleet arrived in Earth's solar system with overwhelming confidence. 300 warships, the largest force the Empire had assembled in a generation. They expected to find Earth's defenders waiting in orbit, protecting their homeworld in a doomed last stand. Instead, they found empty space and silence. No ships, no defenses, no desperate communications. Admiral Thekvar, who'd replaced Vectel in command, felt unease growing in his thorax. This wasn't how primitives behaved. They should be panicking, begging for mercy, launching futile attacks. He ordered sensor sweeps, detailed analysis of the entire system. His crews found nothing, or thought they did, until the first mine detonated. The explosion took out a destroyer on the fleet's outer edge, a contact mine camouflaged as an asteroid. Then another mine detonated, and another, as the Keldrathi formation blundered into a defensive field that humanity had spent 2 years laying. Ships scattered, breaking formation, trying to avoid the hidden weapons. That's when Earth's fleet attacked. 19 ships materialized out of the asteroid belt, having waited in silent ambush with all systems powered down. They struck with coordinated precision, focusing fire on damaged vessels, exploiting gaps in the enemy formation. 4 Keldrathi ships died in the opening salvo before their shields could even form. The battle that followed lasted 3 weeks, a grinding campaign of attrition that bled both sides white. Earth's forces fought with savage efficiency, using the asteroid belt as cover and concealment, striking from ambush and fading back into the rocks. The Keldrathi had superior numbers but found themselves fighting a guerrilla war in 3 dimensions, against an enemy that refused to stand still. They lost ships to mines, to ambushes, to coordinated strikes that exploited every weakness in their doctrine. Earth's fleet took casualties too, 5 ships destroyed and 8 more damaged, but they kept fighting. Because what else could they do? Surrender meant extinction. On the 23rd day of battle, Admiral Thekvar requested a ceasefire. His fleet had been reduced to less than 200 effective warships, losses that would take the Empire years to replace. Earth's defenders were down to 11 functional ships but showed no signs of stopping. The human commanders agreed to talk, meeting in neutral space with weapons powered down. Thekvar looked at Lisa Chen, at Marcus Hayes standing beside her, and saw the same determination he'd faced his entire military career. Earth would never surrender. The cost of conquering them would break the Empire's expansion budget for a decade. He offered terms that 3 years earlier would have been unthinkable. The Empire would recognize Earth's sovereignty. The solar system would be considered human space, off-limits to Keldrathi forces. In return, Earth would not interfere with Imperial affairs beyond their system. It was a stalemate disguised as diplomacy, and both sides knew it. But it was also survival, and sometimes that was enough.